Now remember to be part of our conversations today. Tweet us at CNBC Africa using the hashtag #YourVoteOn410. Now in studio with us we have Dr. Sam Koma, the Senior Lecturer at the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences at the University of Pretoria, and Daryl Glaser, Associate Professor of Politics at WITS, who's going to give us a perspective on how this election is about to turn out. Two university experts on a day of the municipal elections. Starting off with you, Sam. In terms of what do you think makes a great municipality? We've heard everything about how municipalities are struggling, failing. What do you think they need to do on the ground?
Yeah, thanks Chris and Gogo for inviting me to this important panel interview. Part of the work that I've been doing in this particular area is that what makes municipalities tick in terms of their performance, also informed by some of the AG reports, is that if you take, for example, in Mpumalanga, you have Steve Tshwete, local municipality, that has consistently delivered clean audits, and that has been informed by, one, having a stable political leadership in the form of having a mayor, the mayoral executive system, which is constituted by the members of that committee, but also ability of this political leadership to put systems in place in terms of internal controls, but also ability to acquire the best skills in the different fields of a municipality, like town planners, getting the engineers, appointing the right CFO with the right qualifications, and also getting other technical experts in the different areas, and also ability to take decisive action in the event there is failure to fulfill certain objectives of the municipality in line with the IDP, if there is blatant misuse of resources, which are also part of the IDP and the implementation of the budget. So we have good case studies of municipalities that have performed well. In this instance, say Steve Tshwete, you go to the Western Cape, you also have other municipalities that are doing well, they're performing well financially, but also in terms of putting structures, systems, but very important also recruiting the best talents available in the market in the form of your accountants, your town planners, your engineers, and also the legal practitioners.
I mean, that's the ideal. We'll be looking at a list a bit in a moment about the best performing municipalities. Unfortunately, a lot of people who pay their rates and taxes are cynical and say, oh, well, a lot of these appointments and getting the best people is clouded by politics. How much is that reality and how much is that mere myth?
Yeah, exactly, Chris. My position is that it's high time that municipalities become professionalized. In the sense that we need to have people with the right skills, expertise, experience, qualifications, employed in the right positions so that they're able to deliver on the strategic objectives of the municipality as contained in the IDP, and also spending their budget in line with the priorities that are reflected in the IDP. Because the IDP is a product of a consultative process that is informed by a bottom-up approach. Members of the community making input in terms of their needs, their priorities, the business sector, labor, youth formations, and other key sectors. So it's high time that we get the basics right in terms of getting the required skills that is very important in terms of fulfilling the strategic objectives of the municipality. So the days where you'll have people who can just wake up in one morning and say, I'm going to run or manage a 30 billion municipal budget are over. It's high time that we get the requisite skills, and the skills are available in South Africa in terms of the graduates that we are training, producing through the higher education system.
But given that you work with youth and come from a university, how do we incentivize these young people to actually take an interest to work in the public sector service? Because a lot of them just prefer the ivory towers of the private sector, right?
Yeah. That's true, Gogo. But very important, I think moving beyond these elections, ordinary graduates or unemployed graduates should have a sense and hope that these elections will usher in an epoch that says to them that municipalities can serve as employers of choice. Municipalities are ready to attract, recruit, select them, and retain them, and give them space to demonstrate their talents, their abilities, their skills, and all of that, because these are the skills that municipalities require at the end of the day They require these professionals. So the issue of, obviously, politicization of some of these appointments, the good thing is that COCTA has come up with some regulations in terms of prescribing what are the minimum competencies of one becoming a municipal manager. You need a university degree, coupled with experience and
if
other.
I could just bring you in a second, Daryl Glaser, just on the political side. There's been a lot of talk around this election. As I said earlier in the program, often municipal elections are a big yawn, but this one everyone's interested in because of the surrounding a bit. In this vote, how much of this is going to be people voting, say, in a protest against the government and the status quo? And how much of it is going to be people voting saying, look, I want my water, I want my electricity, I want my roads? How much of that you think is the case?
Yes, I was just, as we were talking about the requirements of a good municipality, I was thinking that the function of democracy in this context is obviously to reward municipalities, or local democracy. The function of it is to reward municipalities that do well and punish those that do badly. And I suppose the big question is whether that's really what's going to be happening. Are we going to be seeing voters studiously examining the performances of their own municipalities in terms of lights and water and electricity and so on, or are we going to see them basically subject their own municipalities to what amounts to a kind of referendum on the performance of political parties at the national level? And I do know some people who are interested in local issues and the performance of local councillors, and there will be some split voting where people vote for a ward councillor of one party because they think that person performs well, and another party at the citywide level. But I think that in South Africa, and it's not a unique South African problem, that when it comes to local elections, they often are treated as kind of midterm votes on the performance of particular parties nationally. And perhaps if parties were really rewarded or punished for their local performance, that would assist us in getting the kinds of high-performing municipalities.
Daryl, don't you think that there's more awareness to that in more of your urban areas versus the rural population in the rest of the country? To the both of you.
Yeah, in fact, let me just chip on that. If you look at the latest community survey, which was produced by or released by Status A, it's quite clear that access to basic services has improved. Municipalities have done very well in terms of providing these basic services, your water, electricity, sanitation, and all of that. But what is coming out of the report is that these citizens are now questioning the quality of the end product. Yes, I have access to water, but I have a problem or a concern with the quality of this water I'm drinking every day. So that will require a deeper reflection and intervention on the part of the municipalities moving forward. And also electricity. They're saying we have access to electricity, but the cost of electricity is high. I'm unemployed. Okay? People are losing jobs in the different economic sectors. So that will also require strategic thinking, a different approach on the part of the new mayors who will be elected after this election day, and the councillors who will constitute the new municipal councils. Strategic thinking and visionary leadership. They will have to get that correct.
Bearing all this in mind, as a political analyst, how do you see it stacking up, the three key provinces that everyone's talking about, Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane and Johannesburg, where there's likely to be contention? What's your prediction?
Well, those are the metros that are making this local election so exciting, and that are making this one of the most important elections we've had since 1994. It's the fact that three major urban areas are in contention, seriously in contention. It does look to me as though in all three of those cases there's a significant chance that the ANC's performance will fall below 50% of the vote. And if it falls below 50% of the vote, then we are in the territory of coalition politics, which in the big metros will be, apart from Cape Town, this will be a very novel experience. Parties with very disparate ideologies like the Democratic Alliance, which is a sort of more centrist liberal party, and the EFF, which is a leftist black nationalist party, they're going to have to decide whether they can put aside some of those ideological differences and come together in a coalition with perhaps certain other parties to keep the ANC out. Are some of them going to be tempted to going to coalition with the ANC, which seems very difficult to picture at a time when Zuma is so unpopular. So are we going to be in a whole new terrain? So the election is simply going to be the beginning of it. I would say that the way things are stacking up at the moment, probably the DA will emerge as the biggest single party in Nelson Mandela Bay. I expect the ANC to emerge as the biggest single party in Tshwane and in Johannesburg, but with less than 50%.
To sidestep to the coalition theme that you bring up, though, do they always work? And for such important metros, you know, the implementation sounds a bit tricky there, as you've alluded to.
Well, that's why I think that, you know, the opposition parties, their celebration, if they are able to reduce the ANC below 50%, could be quite short-lived, because the coalition politics is going to be very messy. And guess what? The ANC is not going to sit back passively while the other parties bargain and struggle over the terms of a coalition. They're going to be trying to exploit divisions. They're going to be trying to win particular smaller parties back to the ANC side. So the ANC will not be completely without political ammunition. The ANC, when it had an absolute majority, at least provided a politically stable system of government in the metros. And we could be heading into an interesting but unnerving period of political instability in the big cities.
And
Just
how
to
is
add to
this?
that, I mean, coalition politics are very difficult to manage. It's a very difficult experiment. If you take the case of Lesotho under Tom Thabane, he struggled to manage these varying political ideologies. Now they ushered a new coalition government under Prime Minister Musisili. Currently, SADC is grappling with these dynamics, this conflict emerging within the context of this coalition government. So it's going to be a very difficult period that the ANC is going to enter into, because they're not used to these coalition governments, as Prof. rightly pointed out. From 1995, they've been very clear in terms of getting outright majorities. 2000, they did well. 2006, they ushered majorities in most of the municipalities. 2011, that's when the decline came into play. And the predictions are there that they may not do well in some of the metros, but in some of the municipalities in other provinces, obviously they are certain there in terms of gaining a majority vote.
And is the shift in thinking as well and political leniency, is this trend normal when you take a look at a democracy as young as ours?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Is this trend with regard to changing dynamics with some of the major metros? Because, I mean, 10 years ago, it would have been quite obvious that perhaps the ANC would, you know, sweep through very easily. So are these trends fairly normal with a democracy as young as ours, just over 20 years?
Well, you'd expect a dominant party in any democracy, you'd expect its hegemony to gradually start eroding as the difficulties of economic and social life start catching up with it. The ANC still commands this enormous prestige. There's still a lot of racial identity politics that goes on in South Africa and that determines the way people are voting. But I think what you're seeing is precisely in the big cities, the ANC is weakening, and it's falling back increasingly on a rural support base. And I think that kind of division, there are other countries where one has seen this kind of division happening between the cities and the countryside. And it'll be interesting to see if that becomes a significant dynamic in South Africa's future.
Okay, hold that thought there. We'll be talking a lot more, but we're going to a short break now. When we come back, we'll continue unpacking the details of this year's municipal elections. Remember to be part of our conversations today. Tweet us at CNBC Africa using the hashtag #YourVoteOn410.
Back to the special coverage of the 2016 municipal elections currently underway here in South Africa. As we understand, queues have been filling up and South Africans are clearly participating in this very important occasion. Well, you can continue to share your thoughts with us and join us with regard to the issue of service delivery as well as youth participation. Our guests are still with us in studio, Professor Daryl Glaser, who's Associate Professor of Politics at WITS, Dr. Sam Koma, School of Public Management and Administration at the University of Pretoria, and Gillian Saunders joins us at the desk, Deputy CEO of Grant Thornton, Johannesburg. Gillian, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Just before the ad break, though, we were discussing, the changing landscape with regard to potential coalition parties and highly contested municipal areas and metropolitans. But let's get your view first before we take a look at the best and worst performing municipalities in the country as to a representative of the private sector. How are you hoping that we'll continue to see a lot of certainty in the one metro that is quite important to you, being Johannesburg?
Well, certainly as a private sector, we like to see, let's call it stability, institutional stability. But what we really need to see is, I think what you were talking about earlier, is improvements in service delivery. And we've seen a lot of protests around the country where people, individuals in communities are protesting about service delivery. But in actual fact, the business community needs service delivery as well. And there's huge impacts on businesses. It's actually scary sometimes when you do the research, which we've been doing in different ways, as to how businesses are impacted by aspects of government service delivery and government services that just are not as good as they could be, and it impacts.
Highlight a few of those themes for us, perhaps for the audience who is not too au fait, because some of them might think, well, you're based in Sandton or in Ilovo, like your offices are, so clearly you wouldn't have any complaints.
Well, I'm not going to use recent, yeah, we have. I mean, let's say water cut-offs. We've had days when we've had to send our staff all home. Professional service firm in office blocks in this area, we have to send the staff home for a day or half a day because there's no water. So then we bring in portaloos, which is not nice. Our staff don't like it. I mean, it's a tiny little thing, but that impacts the business. That's productivity. In our business, we sell hours and we sell time of people. And so that's just a very particular experience for us. Obviously, electricity outages are similar. I was in a restaurant in this area on Tuesday evening, and they couldn't serve me coffee because the water was off.
Goodness.
Yeah, I mean, just little things. So all of those things impact on a business, and the business's revenue streams, because now we didn't order coffee, so we spent less than we would have done, etc., etc. And that's the high-level Sandton version of how it happens. If you go to industrial areas, where we've actually been doing some work in Gauteng, in one of the industrial areas, in terms of looking at economic development strategies, they list where we were working, 65% say electricity outages are a constraint to doing businesses. People who want to get more electricity connections, some of them, I've got the number here somewhere, 60% I think it is, wait for more than 4 months to get what they need in terms of electricity connections. Roads is an issue, okay? And we think roads and traffic lights. So there's congestion, there's delays. My truck didn't get to deliver to my customer fast enough. But my truck is also being damaged while it delivers to my customer because it's costing me more wear and tear. So I could just go on and on. But businesses are impacted on productivity, they're impacted on income. And guess what that means? Less jobs, because the business is employing less people.
And also, Daryl, we talked about the urban-rural split as well. I mean, it's a lot nearer the knuckle in the rural areas here. I mean, this surely must be one of the few countries in the world where people actually go on a 3-day protest if they think they're being moved from Johannesburg municipality to another municipality because they fear the consequences.
Yeah, but isn't it fascinating that you'd expect local democracy to be rewarding strong municipalities and punishing weak ones, but where are the weakest municipalities? They're in the rural areas. And that's where the ANC support is going to be strongest. So the whole situation can be quite paradoxical. Urban people are often better informed, more politicized, and even there's some evidence that simply getting some service delivery makes those who don't get service delivery more impatient. It raises the expectations and they become more aggrieved if they don't get what some people in a nearby community are getting. So yes, it's in the rural areas that if you think Sandton is a problem, some of the rural areas, that's where you'd really expect voters to be casting a protest.
Is that the case, Sam? I mean, you think that people getting a raw deal, why aren't they voting then against the people who run their town halls?
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to reflect on the whole notion of what yields a best performing municipality. The point that you raised earlier around municipalities doing well in the Western Cape and other parts of the country. I mean, it's a systems approach. It's inputs and the output. You get inexperienced unqualified individuals don't even expect a high quality output. You have your budget, but your institutional systems are lacking. They are inadequate. They provide room for fraud, embezzlement of funds, abuse of authority. Forget about the clean audit. So those are the basics. And hence COCTA says, get the basics correct. Okay? And those are the basics in terms of ensuring good governance, clean governance, create avenue for members of the public to participate in the affairs of the local government, because it's a constitutional obligation. We don't have to beg to participate in the affairs of the local government. They have to create that space for us to make input as business, my colleague touched on that, as labor, as youth formations, as NGOs, as ordinary members of the public.
And I take it then that's what is clearly in the secret sauce of some of the municipalities that we have a list here, many of them based in the Western Cape, Swellendam, Swartland, Mossel Bay, clearly very influential here and perhaps lessons that we can learn and implement. But I also want to gauge your thoughts, Sam, to stick with you with regard to the rural area involvement. If we know that these are the inaccuracies and the things that haven't been working over the last few years, why is it so difficult then for political leaders to say, look, we're going to swap leadership, you go into the rural area, try to fix things and get the basic services in order, and things should pick up?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges facing rurally based municipalities is ability to acquire and retain this human capital. It's very difficult to attract human capital, an accountant to come and work as a CFO or a town planner to work in the municipality, which is very distant to commercial centers, economic activities, and also a place of residence. So that is a challenge that municipalities will have to grapple with, but very important, do they have a retention policy? Do they have incentives that they can bring to the fore in terms of ensuring that they acquire, they retain this human capital? But also political leaders. A councillor who operates in a rural municipality largely will be someone who's not really having all this technical expertise, ability to interpret the minutes of the council, ability to make sense of the budget of the municipality, this bulky IDP document, okay, all of that. So, as opposed to an urban-based councillor, very exposed, they've got access to facilities, libraries are there, they can familiarize themselves with certain aspects of the governance of the municipality and all of that. So you're dealing with a different sector.
Gillian, there's someone in the private sector, I put it to you. What would be your advice to municipalities to hold on? Because I mean, I know it's a problem. Whenever I phone people I know in the municipalities for a story, they'll say, oh no, sorry, I left 6 months ago or 2 years ago, and oh, okay. But what would be your advice to the private sector, how to hang on to people?
From the private sector to advise the municipalities?
Yes,
okay.
I know it's a very difficult one.
It really is a difficult one. I think it goes to what was being said earlier before the break, where you're talking about professionalisation. And I'm going to, it must be doable on some level. And I think it comes to leadership. And leadership is your CFO, your MM. They need to be the right sort of leaders who motivate people, who empower people. Just to say, I'm using just the same as we say in the private sector. You need transformational leadership. That's the new norm in the private sector. We're saying there's millennials, there's a different generation, there's a whole load of connectivity and impacts on how people do business. It's called complexity, managing complexity. Municipalities are no different to the private sector. It needs good professional management, good leadership of people, and those people, you need to find them. Now, my own specialization, as I mentioned, is tourism. Tourism sits in rural areas. I go to hotels. They've got, not CFOs, but they've got good accountants. They've got good managers. They're willing to live there. Okay, maybe it's a bit more sexy running a hotel than running a municipality. But you can find people who are willing to live in those places and to get involved and to get passionate about what they do. So maybe I'm an idealist or I'm a cup half full person.
Has there been a lot of interaction between representatives of the private sector together with the local municipality, especially in these outside areas? Because we always talk about this informal economy, which is going to bolster South Africa's economic growth.
Well, the informal economy is maybe a different thing, but I think what has happened is over the last few years, the challenges that the private sector and the public sector have tried to talk in the cities and in those rural areas, but especially in the rural areas, and they don't get each other. They talk past each other. There's a lack of trust sometimes. There's you're the capitalist people, you're out to exploit. You're the municipality, you're just not understanding us and you're not enabling and making the environment suitable for business, and you don't give me roads and electricity and water. And so, it's sort of a standoff. We need to rebuild trust, and that I think also helps, because really successful cities or municipalities or towns, the private sector and the public sector collaborate, because together they can make the town work.
Daryl, is that a theme though that we see in urban areas, in particular the hotly contested metros, or is that discussion getting a lot more interesting now and heated, given the changes that we could potentially see take place?
Well, I think, you know, there's a widespread recognition that we need professionalism and competence and collaboration in municipal government. And it's also recognized that, unfortunately, or some would say fortunately or inevitably, the state plays a role also as a source of employment for people and a way for people to acquire resources. And so there's a tussle between these different imperatives. And I suppose what some of the opposition parties could plausibly be claiming is that too much of ANC local government has come to be about building up, if you like, a black middle class. It's about, and beyond that, too much of it has been about rewarding cronies of the ruling party. And so if you want some of these kinds of better practices to prevail, what you need is a stronger emphasis on professionalism and objective and rational government. I think, unfortunately, a large part of the political elite is compromised to some degree or another. So in terms of corruption. So you've got that on the one side and the kind of human capital constraints we heard about on the other. The question is, you know, to what extent are opposition parties, if they get a chance to govern, to what extent are they going to be able to break out of that kind of trap? And it would be interesting to see, you know, a lot of the high-performing DA municipalities are relatively prosperous areas. I would like to see what the DA could do with a place like Johannesburg or Tshwane.
Hypothetically speaking, let's say they win Johannesburg. What are the key challenges that you think that they'd have to address then?
Well, unfortunately, the first thing they're going to be doing is trying to form a stable government, given the coalition imperative. But, you know, there are not massive ideological differences, really, between the DA program and the ANC program. Yes, you've got radicals within the ANC who are well to the left of either. So the real challenges are not around ideology, they're around competence. And I think that's how the DA has been trying to sell itself, as a party of competence and integrity. And I suppose what they're going to have to do is to try and make sure that those are the imperatives that prevail. And if they become compromised by some of their own people becoming corrupt, if there's evidence of cronyism, then that is going to be a huge disappointment. And the real question is, how much value is DA going to be able to add to a place like Tshwane or Johannesburg? Because already you'll find that, say, Johannesburg, in the larger scheme of things, is relatively competently managed compared to poorer areas. It always helps, basically, to have an already rich and relatively well-developed city to look after, as opposed to some, if I don't want to insult rural areas, but let me use the expression rural backwater. Yeah. You'd rather have
a better base to work from.
Yes, Sam, exactly. I mean, the question for you, politically as well, how ready do you think people are to vote for a party that's diametrically opposed to their own beliefs in the cause of, as we say, getting water and getting the roads fixed and getting electricity? Do you think people are ready for that sort of thing? I don't know.
Of course, the stakes are high. These are very highly competitive elections for the first time. If you look at the trajectory of local government elections, very unpredictable, but very exciting. They brought very robust, engaging discussions through the door-to-door campaigns that were obviously undertaken by the various parties, the political rallies that were undertaken. So I think the key challenges that all these parties have to grapple with is, one, unemployment. The levels are high. Poverty levels are also very high. The economy is stagnant. It's not growing. Okay? And people are losing jobs. Our economy is globally integrated. So you'll require a different thinking on the part of the councillors who are coming on board, a different approach on the part of the officials that have been part of the system, devising appropriate strategies on how to deal with these three challenges that are facing an ordinary person, an unemployed person who resides in a municipality, a business person who is located in a municipality. JSE, okay, they require provision of sustainable services from the city of Johannesburg in terms of water and electricity. But the cost of electricity is getting high. They will have to tackle that.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Sorry, Chris, because that's a very huge issue. We've heard all the major political parties really addressing job creation as a significant concern. But are there fundamental differences in their methods of approach to this? Because if there aren't any major differences, then one would question that if a new political party comes into power, will there be any major differences then?
No,
Daryl, Sam?
if you look at all the manifestos of the three parties, DA, ANC, EFF, it's about the same thing. We'll provide access to basic services.
How is the question? Yeah, which all of them need to address, right?
Ensure that these municipalities are well capacitated. They speak more or less the same issues. The difference obviously could be in terms of the approach, but at the end of the day, I don't see how they will fundamentally even disagree in terms of going into a coalition, because the issues they're germane to their respective constituencies.
Look at one of the coalitions here, Swellendam in the Western Cape, at the top of the list here. It's DA and ACDP. I mean, the question I still have, do you think people are prepared to be staunch ACDP supporters if they think that it's going to get things working, even though it's somewhere they've never voted before?
Yeah, well, I think some of the coalitions we might be talking about in the big metros would be more ideologically contentious than DA, ACDP, because the EFF, they are promising a more ideological style of government. So it'll be interesting to see whether they are also going to, in the end, be drawn back into kind of daily bread and butter kind of issues. And perhaps that's where the parties could find their cooperation, because there's only you can only be so ideological in terms of the delivery of basic everyday services. So it could be that there could be areas of practical agreement even between very ideologically different parties. But essentially, you know, all the parties are going to claim to be, or at least the DA and ANC are going to claim to be business friendly. I suspect in the end, even the EFF is going to want to attract business.
Let's hope so. I'm recalling that day when they marched to the JSE.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
2 days.
Yeah. But let's not forget the question of how much of the issue of employment is really under the control of local government. I mean, so much of it is to do with national macroeconomic and microeconomic management. So,
do you think municipalities don't have a significant influence in that regard then?
They do. They have an influence, but I think it's simply one of many inputs into whether a particular region performs well, the municipal government. And there's only so much that's under the control of municipal government. So I suppose that also is quite confusing for the voter. Who do you hold account if there's high unemployment? Let's remember there's pretty uniformly high unemployment across the country. There might be some areas that do a little bit better and some worse. And that's got to do with structural problems in the South African economy at a national level.
If I can just step in there, apologies, Chris. I'm already excited about this job creation topic because we've engaged quite a bit with the city of Johannesburg together with the Gauteng provincial government, and they have all these amazing plans. TAPO 500,000, I think, is the provincial plan to create 500,000 jobs. You have Josie at Work, all these kind of initiatives, which are a lot of the times in partnership with the private sector and university institutions to kind of create this environment where people have access to education, access to getting jobs or cultivating the spirit of entrepreneurship. In your view, have we seen any kind of success from here? Is the private sector also keen to participating in these initiatives? And like you said, if it doesn't make that much of a huge dent in the end of the day, how do we address it then as voters? Because that's again where the disgruntlement comes in, as we saw with some of our commentators earlier on who said, hey, I'm not keen on voting. It's a free public holiday for me. So how do we address these issues?
Yeah, I think we should bear in mind that municipalities have to play a very important role in terms of facilitating a consultative process, getting the views, getting the ideas of these different stakeholders who reside in the jurisdiction of a municipality, so that they are able at the end of the day to shape a strategic vision, a direction of the municipality informed by these priorities that are coming from the different sectors. So at the end of the day, we don't expect a municipality to create these jobs, but create a space to attract domestic investment, attract foreign direct investment, get the required skills, sort out your infrastructure so that people, if I'm a business person, I should be able to have access to markets because the roads are in place. Okay.
Or just
Provision of these services, water, electricity, refuse removal, they should get that as part of the basics.
So just to put this whole discussion into context, one of our journalists from here is currently on a scholarship in the United States, and he went to this municipality meeting in Michigan, and there was a huge gathering of the constituents in the public gallery, and he looked around, you know, being from Port Elizabeth, he looked around and thought, all right, what's going on here? And only to find out that the people had come in to congratulate the council for fixing up all the things that they asked for the year before. So, but on that score, talk about fixing up things and making things work. Gillian, how much scope do you think there is for private money in the municipalities of South Africa? Do you think there is?
Well, I think, let's call it the public-private partnership model can work. And I think municipalities, it's exactly as the Prof says, they've got to have a local economic development strategy. They've got to understand their strengths. You know, it's no good saying, and I often use this, it's no good saying you want to become a tourism destination if you don't have tourism attractions. The same way you're not going to say I'm going to develop coal mining if there's no coal in the ground where you are. So you've got to actually, because everybody wants to do tourism, by the way, everybody thinks they can do it and you can't. But you've got to find your strength. And then you've got to facilitate it, and you've got to create the enabling environment that you have control over the municipality. And you know, it goes to confidence. It goes to simply things like cleanliness even, so that businesses see it as a functioning destination that they can invest in, that the logistics are there, they can get their goods in and out, or they can get the water, the electricity, all of those things. But I also agree that a lot of what constrains business is also national government policies. Red tape and skills, often, skills in terms of education and access to an educated workforce, that's a challenge, and a lot of that comes from national. It is provincial as well, but it's not this election provincial. So we sort of need to get both right, and that for a voter it is a challenge to understand where they're voting now and what can they achieve. But there is so much more that cities and municipalities can do. Economic development, which is where I get involved, but we also do financial management assist municipalities with their financial management, which is a challenging area. But local economic development is often the poor sister in many municipalities. They try really hard to get their service delivery right and to get their finances right and those things, which is correct. They need to do that. But unless they really understand that they've got to do economic development and they need to partner with the private sector, even in conceiving what their strengths are and doing their planning, and then in making sure that where, for instance, a municipality often has a lot of land available, they can work on PPP systems with that land. They even have property. I'll use tourism again. There are municipal resorts all over this country, largely untended, they've gone dilapidated, they're not marketed. If they were just using those, it could create domestic tourism for people, that gives them quality of life, it creates jobs, it creates a status, and it says this municipality is somewhere. So there's so much they could do if they would just get the right professional management and the right approach to making sure the infrastructure's there and then maximising the assets they've got in partnership with the private sector.
Just to add to that, I mean, if you take example of Dubatsi local municipality, which is located in Limpopo, endowed with mineral resources in the form of platinum. Now the question is, these municipal councillors, including the mayor, to what extent are they able to leverage on this strategic resource in terms of ensuring that it is located within the context of the local economy, the regional economy, the national economy, and the global economy. Now they require expertise from the administrative side of the administration, which is, of the municipality, which is your municipal manager, the economist, and the other professionals, to provide expert opinion so that the decisions, the choices they make are informed by empirical data, they're more rational, but they speak to the strategic objectives of the IDP in terms of addressing unemployment, poverty alleviation, growing the economy, increasing the tax base of the municipality. So, as I said earlier, strategic thinking and visionary leadership, that is what is required of these councillors who are coming after the 3rd of August, the outcome of the elections. There will be 257 in number. They need to get the basics right in terms of, for example, coming up with a 100 days plan. That first day in my office, I'm not going to focus on the freebies, okay? And they should not allow the officials to mislead them. That honorable mayor, you deserve a new a BMW 7 Series.
Yeah,
they should not focus on that. They should say, I want to familiarize myself with the system. I want to learn how these systems, the structures operate. I'm going to consult with all these key stakeholders of the municipality so that at the end of the day, I have a sense of what is expected of them. And focus on two important tools for planning and implementation. that is the IDP and the municipal budget, because the spending of the municipality should be aligned to the IDP. And the law says you can review the IDP. The law says you can make adjustment on the budget in line with the IDP. These are the two important tools they will have to focus on and also align themselves with what the Constitution provides for and the pieces of legislation, the Structures Act, the Systems Act, the Municipal Finance Management Act, which provides them authority to provide political guidance and direction on how municipal budget ought to be spent. They have to get that right. After the 100 days, they report back to the community. This is my performance scorecard. Guys, this is what I said. I'll clear certain bottlenecks, but these are outstanding issues that I have to tackle. Give me a year or two to sort out all these issues. And they should perceive this as an honor and a privilege to serve communities. As I said, they should pack these freebies, okay? Because if they run,
Not
they
a
get
game of
these
Monopoly
vehicles,
where collect an extra $100
they're
at the
inviting
corner.
problems. Yeah.
Precisely. Well, we are going to take a quick break in just a moment, but before we do that, I'd also like to get your view, Daryl, with regard to all of these issues that have been mentioned, and again, the key focus on engagement. Is that also the leading success of successful municipalities, the consistent engagement with the members of the community? Because I think if we ask a lot of people out there, do you know your councillor? A lot of them might scratch their heads, right?
I think we've got a crisis of representation in the country, and it operates at all levels, at national level, provincial level and local level. Ironically, it's at local level that we've got constituencies and there's meant to be a level of direct accountability, and yet dissatisfaction with local government is higher than it is with other levels of government, perhaps because it's just the most proximate and you can take your anger out on it. But it reminds us that introducing constituencies into a voting system is not necessarily going to be what's required. Somehow at all levels of government, the government has to get more closely in touch with the people that part of the problem with a party that continuously gets re-elected with large majorities is that it doesn't have enough incentive to stay sufficiently in touch with the people. But again, I think at all levels of government, we need to see, if we want the economy to thrive, we need certainty and we need some kind of social agreement about a way forward. You know, sometimes just as important as the ideological differences is achieving some kind of consensus or agreement between capital, between labor and the state. And a social pact of that kind is crucial. So supposedly we've got a national development plan that's meant to provide a kind of focal point at all levels of government for the way we're meant to be going. But that, like everything else in South Africa, is contentious. There's some people who haven't bought in. And at all levels of government, we need more social agreement.
Indeed. And also holding our leaders accountable, as you said, not a get-rich-quick scheme to becoming a councillor. As a tax-paying citizen, I agree with that fully, Chris. Not too sure how you feel,
no,
but...
absolutely, yes. Yeah, I do.
Exactly. Well, we're going to take a quick ad break, but again, continue with the engagement on social media platforms. Send us your tweets as well as feedback as to how things are unfolding out there at the voting polls at CNBC Africa. Hashtag your vote on 410. We'll be back right after this. Well, we continue with our election discussion and we now address the issue of youth. So that's why Chris isn't here. I'm teasing. He's still young at heart. But youth participation in the elections, and I'm still joined by my guests to give us their feedback and insight. I'm joined by Daryl Glaser, who's an Associate Professor of Politics at WITS, Dr. Sam Koma, School of Public Management and Administration at the University of Pretoria, Gillian Saunders, who's Deputy Chief Executive of Thornton, Johannesburg, as well as Stembile Mbete, who's from the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. There's always this huge debate and conversation about getting the millennials as well as youth participation with regard to participating in these elections. But I want us perhaps to begin on the campaigning element, where we've seen a significant amount of use of social media, hashtags and all these trends. Let's start with you, Stembile, your view on how active the political parties, in particular the three major ones, have been when it comes to driving youth participation in the elections.
Look, I think the big challenge always with young people is getting them to register to vote, because that really is the process of committing. You know, when you register to vote, you commit to participate in the formal electoral process, and then when you turn out to vote, it's then fulfilling that commitment. And I think that the challenge that the IEC has had, that political parties have had, is getting young people to make that initial commitment. Because what we see from the numbers, certainly in the 2014 election, once young people are registered to vote, they actually do turn out. So in the previous election, even though only, I think it was about 33% of young people between the ages of 18 and 19, and then 65% of those between the ages of 20 and 29 were registered to vote. Once they were registered to vote, they turned out at rates of about 83%. So that this thing of encouraging young people to believe in the system and to want to participate in it is the biggest thing. And I'm not entirely sure that the political parties have capitalized as much as they could on that and on the positions that are actually in their manifestos that appeal to young people. We've seen a lot of sort of personality politics. Yes. We've seen a lot of the debate on invoking different legacies and things, but we haven't heard really what the position of the different parties is for young people and what their value proposition is. I don't think that we've heard enough of that. So if you look at the DA manifesto, for example, there's a whole section on appealing to appeal to young job seekers, so having free transport for registered job seekers, so that you can get into town or wherever it is to look for a job. The EFF has a whole section for young artists, and so that they'll make recording studios available and they'll build theatres and communities. The ANC has a big section on extending existing programs, like the Community Works program, but you haven't really heard much of this over the campaign. So that even if you do have the hashtags and you've got the social media presence, there hasn't really been enough of a focus on what political parties are offering the youth, which I think is a great pity. It's a missed opportunity, yeah.
You are quite right. A lot of celebrity endorsements that certainly came through. But to both Daryl as well as Sam, I want to get your view as well. If the political parties haven't necessarily taken advantage of actually delving into their manifestos, as Thembile mentions, to really appeal to the youth. Are we finding, though, that the youth are actually conscious of the fact that, look, I'm not necessarily going to vote on emotion here, but on critical issues that impact me on a day-to-day basis? Is that what you find when interacting with some of these young individuals?
Well, I mean, the first thing we have to say, and this is something you especially see if you are in a university environment, is that the youth have become much more politicized. 2015 was a big year of youth politicization due to the protest movements. Roads must fall, fees must fall. So I used to get asked questions about, how do I think the born frees are going to vote and behave politically? And we didn't have much data on this. And a lot of people used to wonder if they would detach themselves from the ANC and perhaps vote DA. But now that they've spoken, what we actually see is quite a radical generation, at least of students. I don't know how representative they are of the larger youth. This radicalism, how's it going to play out politically? Some of it will play out in the form of a vote for economic freedom fighters. I've seen them command huge support at meetings on campus. Some of them will remain loyal to the ANC, which is after all still an important career opportunity. Some of them, there still is a residue of the kind of youth apathy that I used to encounter when I first arrived at WITS University. So you see a whole variety of political behaviors. But this will be the first chance to see how that kind of youth militancy that we saw last year, and which, by the way, is probably about to erupt again in 2016. It'll be the first chance to see how it's going to play out at the polls. Some of it might even play out in the form of a boycott, because a lot of young people just think the whole formal electoral process is simply beside the point. The real action is on the street, where politics sort of can generate a bit of adrenaline, and they find the voting process a little boring, even though previous generations sacrificed for it and you know, the images of people queuing up to vote were so romantic to those of us who were around in 1994. I think it resonates less with the current generation. So it'll be an interesting test. But you're absolutely right to say that youth participation, youth turnout has been a problem in the past, registration and turnout. And we'll have to see if it's different this time. Yeah.
Gillian, you wanted to add something very briefly?
Well, I'm not a youth person, but I've got 2 daughters at university, so I echo a lot of what you say. One of them was very activist, you know, involved in Rose Must Fall and all of that stuff. So I think the universities, there's the ones who are really engaged, maybe radical, and I know there's a lot of, I'd be very interested at the end of this election to see how many spoiled papers we have, and I'd love to see them by age, which we won't get, because I think it would be very interesting. Because I think there is a protest vote. They don't have a home to go. They need something different, and they don't know what it is. But if I look at the youth as well, I mean, it's a missed opportunity, I think, that they don't quite get the franchise that they've got. And then I go back to education and skills. You know, we have this thing called LO in schools. Why are we not teaching people to understand the system? They don't understand what's national government, what's provincial government, what's local government, the things we talked about that all voters are challenged with. The youth really don't understand that in many ways, especially the non-activist, non-university ones. So I think there's just so many opportunities in this country to engage our youth better through the skills development process so that they understand what they can do with their vote and the franchise. So that's just a mother of students.
A mother of students. Well, we like your view nonetheless. Very briefly though, before we do get some further insight as to what some of our colleagues found out on the street when speaking to young individuals, coming back to this theme of fees must fall, as well as the protest actions that we saw at a lot of the higher learning institutions, what really struck me in majority of the imagery was a representation of almost all of the major political parties. So you can recall the young men and young women who were really leading this furore, a united front, despite the fact that they might come from different political backgrounds. But if we're working towards the same objective, it almost seems to me that younger individuals are open-minded then to working together. So maybe perhaps that theme again of a coalition government coming through, even if it is from a young standpoint. I'm not too sure if any of you agree.
Yes, I agree completely. I think that what we've seen, you know, unlike what, you know, some people, you know, political analysts had thought before, is that what the youth lack of loyalty, for lack of a better way to put it, doesn't necessarily translate into, let's say, abandoning the ANC or abandoning the DA. They'll stick with the political party that they feel speaks to their needs and speaks to their interest, but they're far more open to criticizing that political party, to criticizing its leaders, and also with joining in coalition with young people of other political parties if and when that's necessary. So yes, in universities you saw with Roads Must Fall, with Fees Must Fall, students mobilizing and a real informal type of political participation and making political statement. But what you've seen with the protests, the so-called service delivery protests, is that many of those are instigated and led by young people as well. And they're led by young people who may be a card-carrying member of whatever political party, but feels completely comfortable and okay with criticizing the leadership of that party, with criticizing the performance of that party, even if they're going to vote for it later on. And I think that idea of, you know, you can't be vocal in your criticism of the party is something that young people don't have as much as older generations.
Very true. Daryl and Sam, you wanted to add very briefly?
I agree with my colleagues. The youth is highly engaged, and part of our strong, lively civil society, the bulk of that, these are young people, highly conscientized, they know their rights, but they're tired of this rhetoric. We'll create jobs. Tangibly, where are these jobs? I'm a graduate in public administration, law, economics, town planning, accounting, social work.
But are standing at traffic lights holding boards to get jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So pitch, I think all political parties, I think they failed to pitch the message to the level of the young people, especially in the higher education sector and those who have just graduated or completed their studies. So political parties, they will have to find a new way of getting to the space of the young people and pitch the message that resonates with their interests, aspirations, demands, and also in terms of obviously the future. Because the youth, they vote with their feet. If you say access to basic services, yes, access to that. But I'm a young person. I want space to set up a new enterprise.
Yes.
Get incentives to fulfill my dreams, and also to demonstrate my talents, abilities, acquired through a higher education sector or system. So I think moving forward, they will have to find a different way of addressing this critical sector of our society. Big in numbers as well.
Very
because
true.
our population is getting in.
We'll continue with that theme because we know that it certainly brings a lot more interesting insight into what might happen in 2019. But continuing with our discussion regarding the youth involvement and youth participation in voting, as we know, many of these young individuals will be heading to the polls to vote. And CNBC Africa asked what young people identify as key issues and what they would like to see from their leadership. Holly Johnston compiled this report.
This is WITS University, just one of the training grounds for South Africa's future leaders. It has, however, also been the setting for a series of youth protests that began last year. For many of these students, these elections will be their opportunity to vote for the first time.
I think the main issue is education, because I feel like without education our country can't go forward.
I would really like the government to address education because I feel like it is very important to empower the young youth of South Africa because they're the future.
Unemployment rates are up, all the hospitals have gone down, medical care, everything. I mean, we've had protests at this university where people are fighting for their education, and it was promised to us.
Healthcare and education.
If only the government could try and come up with a plan that can make or generate education to be accessible for the students that have been previously disadvantaged.
They should try to set an example for us so that we as the youth are able to see that this is how we are supposed to hold ourselves and present ourselves to the world.
A leadership that is honest and transparent in the issues that they deal with.
We need to find people who know what's going on, a people's person.
This is Ntombi Maposa, a research fellow from Section 27, whose primary focus is on youth-related matters.
I think that for the majority of the youth, unemployment is a big problem, as well as access to higher education. So those two go hand in hand. I would definitely say when it comes to healthcare services, access to youth-friendly clinics, so clinics that are aware of the issues that young people face. Young people don't get enough comprehensive sex education. I would like to see the quality of education in the lower level to be improved. I would like access to education to be improved, whether that's in the form of free higher education or the provision of more bursaries. I would like there to be a promotion of an entrepreneurial culture.
Taking the conversation to Alexandra Township, this is what the youth living on the fringes of society had to say.
I would like our leaders to build new clinics and improve our education.
Service delivery is not there. And secondly, I would like to emphasize on educational department.
They have to be honest and they have to motivate us, inspire us. They have to set a good example.
I would like the government to provide our healthcare. At clinics, we find that people are not being attended at most times and they die there. And for an example, at our schools, some taps are leaking and we are not having healthy water. And I would like the government to improve our education.
Rich or poor, every South African will have their chance to vote. Holly Johnston, CNBC Africa, Johannesburg.
So looking at those reflections that certainly came through there, we're all looking for the same objectives to appeal to the masses, regardless of where you might be standing from a financial perspective. And that brings us to another element that we were discussing very briefly off air. With regard to the open criticisms, Tembile, you mentioned that the youth feel that I can belong to a particular political party, but I'm also very open to criticizing the leadership should the need arise. How does that differ, though, if you have a young individual who's based in Bryanston here in Johannesburg and has an alliance to a particular political party, and someone who has the same standing with that political party but might be based in a rural area outside? Would they still be as open and as vocal with regard to criticism and their participation in the party?
Look, I think that we've seen certainly a growing urban-rural divide in our politics in the last few years.
And even through racial divides, right?
And even through racial divides, where young people in urban areas, whether it's affluent urban areas like a Bryanston or whether it is in urban townships around the country, are far more involved in criticizing different political parties, whether they do it through protests, so being on the streets, as Daryl said, or whether they do it on social media, on Twitter, or whatever. So that you've seen definitely a far greater appetite and a far greater ability amongst urban young people to mobilize against even the political party that they are members of. I think that we're not really sure in rural areas, mainly because a lot of that political protest and that political activity isn't covered sufficiently in our media, and it's something that us academics don't do sufficiently in terms of going out and really finding out the views of young people in rural areas. So that it's not something that I can definitively sort of pronounce on, but what you can definitely see is that in urban areas across income divides, that there's the same kind of protest, whether that protest is happening on the street or social media. Yeah.
I find that very interesting, because so often we like to say, Sipho Shabalala, staunch, member of this particular political party, and might have, emotional contentions towards it. But, again, depending on the background of that particular individual or where they might be based and what they're open to, there could be a Sipho Shabalala in Bryanston versus KZN, but still have very different views and outcomes. And that takes me to the EFF, perhaps, where we saw Julius Malema this weekend again speaking very proudly in Sipedi and addressing individuals who are unemployed, who he said buy newspapers and have even gotten sick and tired of purchasing those newspapers because they're not getting jobs. So are we finding that from an EFF perspective, are they managing to tap into the broader youth market, those who are educated and perhaps employed, middle class South Africans, as well as the guys at the bottom who are still struggling to get in there?
Yeah, look, I think there are different EFFs. In the northern provinces, there's a kind of Sotho-Tswana regional EFF. And then in Gauteng, you've got a different kind of EFF, which has got, I think, a more black consciousness kind of focus and has got a large youth following. And that following is very visible to me in the universities. EFF meetings can command a lot of very excited singing, chanting people in red overalls. But I just want to say something, to me, the real danger is of young people becoming disconnected from the political system altogether and becoming disillusioned with it. There's undoubtedly a lot of anger around, and I hear young people saying they're disillusioned with the whole post-1994 constitutional settlement. And so to me, if they're engaging in party politics at all and turning out to vote, that's a very positive sign that the democracy is still able to be meaningful to them and it's still speaking to them. What we really have to worry about is the moment when youth feel that parliamentary politics, or municipal politics, all these kinds of politics is completely irrelevant.
What would be the worst case scenario then if that does take place?
Well, I think I don't think the country is going to collapse overnight, but I think that it would portend future political and social instability if there's a growing disillusionment with the political process.
And I think that's something to be aware of in terms of what could influence turnout in this election, because what we know is that in local government elections, even though there's been an upward trend of turnout since 2000 and 2006, 2011, was a surprisingly high turnout, or much higher than people were expecting, with the around 57-58%. But this year, the political context in the country is quite a difficult one. There's this sense of, there's this general malaise, and people aren't really trusting institutions in as much as perhaps they have in the past. The socioeconomic situation where, the economy is performing really poorly, high unemployment, you've seen all this like party factionalism. And I think that, and I agree with Daryl, that I think that may have a downward pull on participation of young people if they say, look, this whole system's a bit of a mess. What's the value for me in participating? And I think that sort of general sense of distrusting, especially institutions and the foundation of the political system, is really the threat to turnout and youth participation altogether. Yeah.
Yeah, just, sure.
Go ahead, either of you.
Just to add to that, I mean, if you analyze the fees must fall movement, a very interesting trend. These guys, they were adamant that we want to directly meet the president.
Yes.
This representation, a meeting convened by the president, meeting with student representatives, we don't buy it. So this could be a potential trend moving into the future, that the whole system of representative democracy may come into question. Because these young people are saying, we can express our views on our own. We don't want the middlemen. Okay, provide a platform, and we have to express our views directly with the powers that be, either the president, a premier, a mayor. So we have to really look forward to a very bright, lively, interesting future. Those young people are saying, we have all these abilities to express ourselves. We know what is expected of us in terms of our needs, our aspirations, our interests. So moving forward, we have to listen to them and provide space for that voice to emerge.
Gillian, you wanted to add something briefly?
It's not really related to the elections currently, but I think this change in the youth, and it's a global change to some extent as well, this mistrust in institutions, mistrust in brands, and challenging democracy, challenging the parliamentary system, and similarly challenging capitalism. So, they come to work these days, and let's say they've got the best degree and they come into the work environment, they are different in terms of what their expectations are in the work environment. And so the same as the political parties, the same as the municipal, the people who get elected to actually run our country, corporates have the same challenge with the millennials and the younger generation. How do we become meaningful for them? How do we give them a purpose so that when they come to work, it makes sense for them in some way or other? And how can we show them there is a system that has its bad points, no system's perfect, but can deliver. It can deliver jobs, it can deliver value-added economic growth, but how can we do it in a balanced way so that we meet everybody's needs in society, not just the capitalists? So it's a huge challenge. It's a political party challenge, it's running municipality, running a company challenge. And then I go back to the thing that political parties can deliver, but it is national as well as local governments, but we need education. These guys, and we need education to also change, because the world is a different place. So our current sort of classroom-based, subject-based approach to, and sorry, you guys are from educational institutions, is somehow not getting what the thinking, problem-solving, initiative out of the people, so that when they come to work, and we have to change the work environments as well, they can do things that add value in the workplace. And so if we want something for the political parties to deliver after an election, is a better education system where we get the right skills. And just briefly, in this country we have a purely academic system largely. Everybody thinks they've got to get a matric. And so what do? We have a 35% or whatever it is pass rate at matric, which is terrible. That person goes into the working world thinking, I'm okay if I get 35%. When I deliver for a client, if I deliver a 35% good report, that's no good for a client. So we need to take those kids and give them some other opportunity to feel that they've achieved, so that they understand that even my ability at the 35% of an academic matric is still valuable in vocational ways, in trades, in other ways. And something's wrong there. And that impacts us in the business community. The people are not able to get easily gainfully employed, and it makes leading them in the business world a much bigger challenge.
So true. You hit the nail on the head.